I recently put up 2 polls on my channel, one concerning the question of whether or not Elder Scrolls 6 will flop with everything in between as a potential result, and a still more recent one, looking past that question, asking what area of Tamriel would be most interesting when it comes to the next Elder Scrolls game. It was revelatory, and I was genuinely surprised by the results, as you can see, because based on these, I can tell a lot of you won't like my take. But I plan on talking about it regardless. Of course, ultimately we have no influence on this, as God Howard will decide what he wants to do. But I still thought it was a relevant question, and if we were to travel back in time to what seems to be yesterday, Bethesda had released a teaser trailer for the Elder Scrolls 6 in 2018. Now this could have just been a way to keep the fans sated, since they had already been waiting 7 years, which at the time seemed an ungodly amount of time, and none of us were aware back then that it would take nearly 20 years. But what the teaser suggested was that the next Elder Scrolls game will likely take place in Hammerfell, after all the analyses had been done, and had been exhausted. And given this, as well as the poll results, I might have a hot take here. But I don't think Hammerfell is the best location for the next Elder Scrolls game. Now don't get me wrong, I think in theory any location in Tamriel could potentially be good, as that ultimately lies in the hands of God Howard and his team. But after Skyrim, with its distinctive landscape, flavor and character, and the many disappointments and losses that Bethesda has accumulated over the ensuing years, they really need something fresh and different to make Elder Scrolls worth it again. And I just don't think Hammerfell is the best option for that. And this begins with the basic geography of the region, which isn't all that exciting. Hammerfell, once known as Hegatha, the Deathland, or Deathlands, or Valenfell, is a province and republic in the west of Tamriel, bordering Skyrim, Cyrodiil, and High Rock. This province is made up of beaches, jungles, grasslands, mountains, with the northwest corner taken up by the Alikir Desert. Now, there is some variation, and jungles could be noteworthy, but what about the rest? Beaches, grasslands, a sprinkling of mountains and desert. Sure, it might be slightly different from Skyrim, but the only thing that really stands out here is the idea of jungles. Everything else has some variation in Skyrim save for the deserts. And think about it. Are deserts really ever interesting? Especially ones made by Bethesda. You've ever tried wandering about in one of the hundreds of boring and barren planets with equivalent deserts that Bethesda procedurally generated for Starfield? It loses its charm within a few minutes. And now apply that to a giant desert, or even a huge interior just filled with empty grasslands, and what do you expect? Skyrim had its own unique far north subarctic vibe. Cyrodiil, being the center of Tamriel, had a wide variety of environments to explore, and Morrowind was just bizarre and weird in a good way. To put it simply, Hammerfell sounds incredibly bland, and not sufficiently different from what we've experienced thus far. Now, as stated earlier, that doesn't mean that it couldn't be in theory compelling and appealing, but the parts out of which it is made do not inspire confidence. It also seems that Bethesda insists on working through the continent of Tamriel by way of adjacency. Hammerfell borders Skyrim, so that is the next region to cover. But why is this necessary, or even desirable? I would argue any of the other regions could potentially make for a better game, just based on geography and topography alone, but 2 regions in particular stick out more than the others, namely Black Marsh and the Somerset Isles. Both Black Marsh and the Somerset Isles offer intriguing possibilities in terms of landscape and topography compared to Hammerfell. So let's start with Black Marsh. Why would Black Marsh be a better choice than Hammerfell? It should be obvious, but pointing out the obvious, it's way more exotic than Hammerfell ever could be. And I think a radical shift is needed from what we've come to know after Skyrim, something Hammerfell just won't do. Black Marsh, of course, is a giant swamp, which on its face doesn't sound incredibly appealing. But the fact that it is radically different from anything we've gotten thus far in Elder Scrolls is its first selling point. And a giant swamp isn't all that bad, considering what we know from the lore. Black Marsh is a lush and threatening land teeming with poisonous plants and violent predators. The region's tropical climate lends its plants the capacity to overturn all attempts to cultivate them. That was just a snippet. So the appeal of Black Marsh is not necessarily its breathtaking vistas and mountains, but rather its very nature as a biotope. The plants, animals, and marshlands are so different from anything we've seen so far in Elder Scrolls that it would be absolutely fantastic to be able to play it for the first time. Then imagine ancient temples and ruins half sunk into the swamp, and it really gets the trepidatious explorer vibes going. At least it does for me. Black Marsh would be scarier, more ominous, and just plain more compelling compared to anything in Hammerfell. Now my personal pick when it comes to the next Elder Scrolls game is most definitely the Somerset Isles. It's not exotic as Black Marsh, it still represents a radical departure from anything we've seen hitherto in the Elder Scrolls. I'm imagining a much more expansive water-based environment, filled with grottos, underwater caves, sailing and swimming, and just a place that takes full advantage of what an island-based environment can offer. Imagine, for example, swimming in the sea and fighting off sharks. Of course, we do have to set aside the fact that Bethesda probably could never make swimming look or feel realistic or good in a game, but it's still a nice concept to think about. But all of that is just the landscape. So what about the other reasons? Well, from a lore perspective, it would be nice if we moved away from the race of men. The last two games focus on Imperials and Nords respectively, and we are somewhat overdue for a game about a race that is not men, either Argonians or Mare, specifically the Altmore or High Elves. Argonians are compelling because they are, as stated before, exotic, and more important than that, we arguably know the least about them in terms of their history and culture, at least compared to men and Mare. Combine that with the radically different topography of Black Marsh, and it would just be a better combination than Redguards and Hammerfell. Given the unknowns surrounding Black Marsh, there's just so much Bethesda could potentially do to make the place interesting. The Altmar in conjunction with the Somerset Isles could potentially be even better for a number of reasons. In light of the story and history of Skyrim, a fantastic opportunity, say 2 centuries later, to explore what has become of the Altmeri Dominion, and to explore its seat of power in the Somerset Isles proper, and how it's evolved. And as mentioned before, that in conjunction with the fact that the Somerset Isles represent a radical departure from anything Bethesda has done prior in terms of level design and landscape, is another compelling reason, which is also sadly a reason why I think they will shy away from it. Hammerfell just strikes me much more of the tried and true in terms of landscape and challenge. And whilst it could theoretically be interesting, knowing Bethesda, I'm not sure how they would achieve this. Redguards, of course, could be worth exploring given their history, and the fact that they fled from their original homeland, Yakuta, to Hammerfell in the First Era, and if I were a betting man, I strongly suspect that the history of Yakuta will in fact factor in heavily into the story of Elder Scrolls 6, but regardless, I think either Altmer or Argonians would just be a lot more novel, rather than having another human majority region, and that's the problem. I can't help but think that Bethesda is working on Hammerfell precisely because it is less challenging than something new and different, such as the Somerset Isles or Black Marsh. Bethesda has never really pushed the envelope, and this seems to be yet another case of it. Though again, I am not so much opposed to Hammerfell as I am stating my personal preference. Ultimately, given how precarious the situation is with Bethesda after Starfield, a good game, no matter what the region is, would be very welcome. It's hard to see it happening at this current juncture in time, and maybe it never will. But hey, you never know. What about you? What would you like to see the most in the next Elder Scrolls game? Where would you like to see it take place? Do let me know in the comment section. Regardless, thank you for watching. If you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.